Hi guys, Mike here at MX Tutorials, and welcome back to a new video. Well guys, today's video is going to be a bit unusual, and be forewarned, it may be a bit messy. Reason is that I received a question from Chris Buisi, and he asked me, can you explain how you approach modeling in general? So instead of doing tutorials on how to create a table, a car, a gun, and so forth, kind of explain your approach on how you start modeling, how you kind of decide what goes where, how do you get your information, and so forth. Okay, so I'm kind of going to walk through the process, and it's my process. It's not the process, so keep that in mind. And that said, let's get started. Okay. So, whenever you decide that you're going to model something, one of the first questions that will pop up is, okay, what are you going to do? Hard surface modeling or organic modeling? Okay. Now, that needs some explanation. So, what's hard surface and what's organic? Now, a lot of people say hard surface modeling is anything that is dead. Okay, so a table, a chair, a rock, whatever, something that is not moving, it's static, it doesn't deform, and so forth. Organic, more related to humans, characters, animals, and so forth. But it's not that easy because sometimes you have animated hard surface objects. Let's say in a cartoon you have a car that bends as it goes through a curve, for example. Okay, then suddenly a hard surface object looks a lot like an organic object. Okay, and there's a big difference when you're modeling that. So definition is a bit unclear, but that's kind of a guideline. All right. So let's say we're going to start to model something. One thing that everybody is always talking about is the poly count. Now, what I'll do is I'll create a simple sphere. And as I do that in my default, you can see up here that there are a bunch of numbers. And the reason why that shows up is if I go into, let's say, display, heads up display, and poly count, if I select that, I see that data. Okay. Now, there are three columns here, one on the left, one in the middle, and one on the right, and the one on the left and the one in the middle are the same for now. Now, why is that? If I create another object, let's say a cube, and I pull that out, I now have two objects in my scene. If I select everything, then on the left I have my total count and in the middle as well. If I select one of them, then I have the total face count for the entire scene, so both objects, and behind faces, this is my actual poly count for my object. So 400 is the poly count of my sphere, and 6 is the poly count for my cube. Okay, so that's about poly count. Now, why is that important? A couple of reasons. First, when you start to model, try and keep things very low poly and very basic. Uh, because if you start off with a mesh count that is too high, then it will be very hard to see what's going on in your model, and it will be very hard to understand how your model takes up space. Okay, so start off very, very basic, very, very low poly. Second reason is a lot of objects end up in game engines and so forth. And you can imagine if you have a sphere like this that is animated, it has to be rendered in this position, it moves, it has to be rendered again, it moves, and so forth. So a lot of calculations are going on, and this is a big strain on your system resource. Okay, so especially for animations, you want to make sure that you keep a very low poly count. Now, what's very low? Depending on the environment where your model will end up, anything between a face count of 400 to, let's say, a few thousand, maybe 2,500 and so forth. What is considered a high poly mesh? 20,000, 500,000, 2 million, just, to get an idea. Okay. So does that mean that you always have kind of ugly looking low poly objects in games? No, of course not. So how does that work? Well, let's say I got this cube and I'll hit Control D to duplicate it and I'll move it over. and I'll go to mesh and smooth. You see that this deforms, right? Now, this is the same object as this. It looks different, but it's the same. Now, if I wanted to have a cube that looks the same like this, I would go back. I would take this guy, Control D, move it over. And what we're going to do is we're going to go up to Edit Mesh, Mesh Tools, Insert Edge Loop Tool, Option Box. We're going to add subdivision. Let's do 10. Okay, so 10 here, and 10 here, and 10 here. Looks exactly the same. However, this guy has a face count of 6. This one has a face count of 726. Okay. All right. So what you would do is you would transfer the detail from the high poly to the low poly object without increasing the face count. So let's say you have some little detail going on here. I'll just take a number of faces here, and you've got some sort of pattern going on. Edit Mesh Extrude. Okay. So if I wanted to have this detail onto that object without adding any count to my poly count, I would create a normal map. And I did videos on that. You create a normal map and you apply it to your low poly object. Okay, but that's for another day. All right. So that's why poly count is important. Okay. Now, to get into the next section, okay, so how do you then approach a model in general? Okay, we'll just quickly pop over to Photoshop. And here in Photoshop, I loaded a couple of basic reference images to kind of walk you through the process. Okay, so we've got the kitchen sink here, and I'll just create a new layer so I can kind of draw on it. I would approach this based on basic polygon objects initially. Okay, so what do I mean by that? For example, this object right here is I'm drawing with my mouse, so sorry for the poor drawing here. Okay, so basic cube. This is a flattened cylinder. Here as well, here as well, here as well. This here is a cube or a cylinder. Okay, same deal. This is a cylinder that has been bent. Okay, now you can decide to do that manually. You can do a deformer, whatever you want. But it's important, again, to start very low poly to get your basic shape and go from there. Okay. Now, the second thing you would consider in this image is there's some texture applied to it. It's a white tabletop or countertop, I don't know what that's called, and you got your sink. Now, this is kind of a metal look, and this is pretty plain white. Now, whenever you are working in Maya, you always have to consider, okay, am I going to apply shaders or textures? Now, a shader is, for example, a standard Lambert, a Blinn, a Phong, and so forth. A texture is a 2D texture file that's applied to your object. Okay. Now, in this scenario, the white can be simulated by, for example, using a white Lambert, and the metal look can be applied by creating a Blinn. So there's not really a need for external 2D texture files, depending on your use of this image. Okay. Uh, if you're going to use this in a game, for example, and you want the faucet to move and so forth, different story, okay? You would have to UV map it, you would have to texture it. But if you're going to model this and apply simple shaders to it, and then just render out the shot and use it as a desktop wallpaper, you're good, okay? So let's go to the next one. Okay, basic chair. Again, we'll create a layer here. Okay, so what do we got? We got, oops, we got cubes here, we got cubes here, 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 and it's pretty much all basic shapes. This is a flattened cube on top, and whenever you're modeling something like this, One thing you need to consider, and actually consider that always, is as these joints of the chair hit each other, what you want to avoid is that you get a situation like this, where you have one cube and the other one is cutting into that original cube. Now, why is that important? You're going to get trouble in this area. And that is because this object has a 2D texture file applied to it, and so does this one. So in these areas up here and down here, you can have two textured layers on top of each other, right? First of all, it's going to look ugly. Second, while rendering, that could create problems, okay? So that's one. Then let's go at this one. A bit more complex shape, but still, we're going to break it down into basic elements, okay? So we have a cylinder going on here. We got a cylinder here. We got kind of a basic cube shape here. We got a cube here, here as well, here as well. And we've got another cylinder, and we've got another cylinder, and so forth. So start with very, very basic shapes. Now, another problem comes to mind when modeling this guy. And that was the same for the other ones, but those were more easy to kind of figure out. We only have one image of the gun. We have the side view. So what does it look like from the top and from the back and from the bottom? And so it's always key to try to get the best reference images possible to allow you to understand how things are built and structured. So you simply know how to model and where to model. Makes sense, right? Okay. Next one. And as we progress, it gets a little bit more difficult, but still here, very, very basic setup. We got cubes going on. Okay. Like that. We got cylinders right here and here and here and here. And the top of our roof can either be a manually modeled shape, but you can also decide to take a simple polygon cube and then take this vertex and this vertex, move them together, and you will get something like this. All right. Once you have the basic layout of the house, you then work on the details, and you add details like these roof elements here. Again, cubes. Uh, Rectangular cubes for the windows, and so forth. Okay. Especially with something like this, you need to consider, okay, I'm going to texture this later on. What do I need to keep in mind? And I'll get into that in a minute in Maya. Okay. All right. Next one. And again, a bit more complicated. Still, basic shapes. Extruded cylinders. Okay. Cubes. Cubes. Right there. Another cube up here. Work on the basic shape and then add details as you move along. We got a cylinder down here and so forth. All right. Now, in this next picture, this is kind of the ideal scenario. You have a perspective view, you have a side view, top view, and so forth. If you have an image like this, you could pretty much copy it by loading these images into Maya and modeling it from the various views. But in many cases, you don't have that. So you'll have to be creative, and you will have to develop a sense of, a space, if you will. All right. Now that said, let's jump into Maya, and we'll talk a little bit about UVing. Okay. Alrighty. So we're in Maya. We're going to take a simple cube. We're going to hit R. We're going to scale it out. We're going to push it down, and let's create a simple table. Okay. Going to right click, go to face, select that face, edit mesh, and extrude. Tweak the offset a bit. There we go. Let's say to there. Hit G to repeat and W to pull down. All right. So here we have it. There's our table. Right click object mode and pull it up. All right. Now, Depending on the use of my table, I would kind of look at, what kind of faces are created in this object and do I need them all? Let's say this table is in a game scene. It's sitting in a room and it's sitting there and it's never going to move. Okay. Now we talked about face count. Our table has 14 faces. Do I really need the face on the bottom here? We're never going to see it. So I'm going to right click at a face. I'm going to delete it. Don't need it, so delete it. Okay. Now, this is our table, and based on what we're going to do with it, we need to decide whether we need to UV map it and either apply shaders or textures. Okay. So again, if I render this out as a simple single shot and use it as a desktop wallpaper, so just creating an image, I don't really need to UV it unless I have trouble applying textures to it. But if I can get away with it, I wouldn't have to UV it. But let's say I want to use it in a game environment, in a movie, whatnot, then I probably would because I don't know what the next person in the team is going to do with it, right? Probably they'll tell me, and probably I have a script, so I know, but just in case, okay? So when we get into that process, you need to consider, based on sketches, concept art, and so forth, what is it going to look like in the final product? Now let's say that the top of this table is going to be tiles and the sides are wood, okay? Complete different scenario from this being wood and this being wood as well, because the 2D texture that you're going to apply to the tabletop will have to have a natural flow from the top over to the edges. And if you have tiles and wood, that wouldn't be the case. Okay, so we're going to right click and go to object mode, and then we're going to go to UV. We'll do an automatic projection, and then we're going to go to UV and UV editor. And here is our UV, and let's create some clarity here. So I turned on shaded UV so we can see it a bit better. Now, if I right click and go to shell and I hover over these, and I'll just click this away so we can see it better. Right click shell. Okay, so I can see that the second one here, that's my tabletop, right? I'm going to hit W, I'm going to move it out and hit R and scale it up a bit. All right. Now, in the scenario where the top is tile and the sides are wood, I wouldn't want to connect the sides to this because I'm going to lay a 2D file flat over this image, okay? But because, let's say I want it to be in wood completely, I would have to attach it. So I'm going to right click at the edge, and this edge corresponds to that one. So I'm going to go to polygons, move and sew. Now this distorts my tabletop because this guy is too small, and I just scaled that up, okay? So I'm going to right click on a shell, select it, go back to polygons, and I'm going to click on unfold. Okay, so now it's down here, right here. Here we go. And now they have the same size. Okay, so right click shell. Let's see what we got. I'm going to flip that around. Okay, so now we have the top and we have this guy. I'm going to right click, go to edge, and I'm going to start to look for this edge right there, which is, let me see, that one. Okay, so select that, move and sew, that one, move and sew, that one, and move and sew. So now I have the top of my table with the 4 edges. And again, if I applied a wood texture to that, I would have a nice flow going all the way around. Now let's go back to the original scenario. So I'm going to right click on the edge, and I'm going to take these 4 edges, and I'm going to go back and I'm going to cut the edges. So now, oops, let's try that again. Cut UV edges, right click shell. There we go. Okay. Let's say the tabletop is tile. So this guy is done. But these guys, they're going to be wood. And this wood texture is going to flow around the corner, right? So I need to kind of stitch these guys together, and all depends on, okay, what is it going to look like when it's done? Okay, so in that case, I'm going to right click at a shell. Let's see if we can find a front one right there. And I want the sides over here and over here to be connected. So I'm going to right click, go to edge. And let's see, I got these two, which is that edge right there. And I'm going to go to move and sew. And that's the one over there. Move and sew. And one more, move and sew. Okay. So now if I right click, go to shell, there we go. I got the entire edge of my table. Okay. However, there is a seam. Okay, so we need to figure out where it is. So we're going to right click and go to edge. And as we select this up here, you see that this one corresponds to the one down here. So this corner up here is where my texture edge is. Now, usually you would want to have this texture edge out of sight. So if the table were positioned in a room like this, I would put it right there. I wouldn't put it here unless you have a seamless texture and you don't see it. Okay. So in short, what I'm saying here is that you need to keep in mind, okay, what is my final product going to look like? What type of texturing am I going to use? Do I need to UV? And what do I need to consider when UVing based on the final look? Okay. So one more thing, we're going to talk a little bit about modeling for the purpose of, animation. Okay. All right. So for that purpose, I loaded up this guy. It's I think I put this together in the Make Human program. So let's have a look at this mesh. Okay, I'll just turn off texture here, and we'll do 4 for wireframe mode. And what we're going to look at is edge flow. Okay, so this arm, for example, is connected here, and we have the armpit, right? Obviously. And whenever you are creating edges and edge flows, you need to consider when my object is moving, where will it move and how will it respond, okay? Now, the best way to explain that is by giving you an example. Hang on. So what we're going to do is we're going to create, actually, let's get rid of this guy for a sec. Okay, we'll create a simple polygon cylinder. We'll hit F to zoom in, and we'll hit R, and we'll scale that out, okay? I'll hit 5 for shaded mode. And what we'll do is we'll go to deform, and we're going to go to nonlinear, and we're going to go to bend. Okay. If I now go to my bend tab and I want to bend this, you can see I can't do it, right? It's kind of weirdly deforming on my object. And the reason for that is there are not enough edges in my object in the height to actually allow it to bend. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to, let's get rid of this. We'll take a new one. We'll pull that up. And before we do anything else, we're going to add some subdivision in height. Okay. Then we're going to go to deform, nonlinear, and bend. And now if we take this, now suddenly we can bend our object. Okay. So edges are very important. But you also need to keep in mind you don't want a poly count to be too high. So you're going to place your edges in a logical space. Okay. Now let's say you have an arm of a character. New cylinder, pull that up a little bit, and let's do maybe 5 in height. Okay. Now if this were an arm, and I'll just kind of flip that over, and I had, let's say, an elbow. All right. Let's make that horizontal just to make it cleaner. Okay. Okay. So let's say this is an arm, and my elbow is somewhere around here on this edge. Okay. Now I know that it's going to bend in this direction. So what would make sense is to select that edge and kind of move that edge towards the movement that I want. And then I'm going to right click on a vertex, take these and kind of pull that out and so forth. So this is a more natural flow for that edge, okay? So that's the kind of thing that you need to keep in mind when working on that. All right, so these are just a couple of thoughts as to how I approach the modeling process. It's by no means complete, but hopefully it's helpful. And if you have any questions, let me know, and I'll help you if I can. Okay, thanks for watching. See you guys next time. Bye.